Hello! Welcome to the video. I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in November. It's a long stack of books, so grab your hot beverage of choice. Mine this evening would be strawberry hibiscus tea. So join me, settle in, and we're going to talk about some books. The first book that I read this November was Bull by David Eliot, which is a YA retelling of the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, which I knew obviously what the Minotaur is in Greek mythology, but I did not know his origin story, and boy is it rough. So if you like poetry, Greek mythology, and dark comedy, this is the book for you. One of my favorite things about this book was reading the print copy. You get to see a lot of really creative ways that David Eliot uses text placement on the page. He uses caps lock, he uses letters actually falling, and the change in the background of the page color. All sorts of really creative ways to emphasize the point that he is making. So I found this a very enjoyable read. It was a quick read, and I liked it. So 3 out of 5 for Bull. The next book I read was Fire by Kristen Cashore, which is a YA fantasy book, and it is set in the Dells, which is currently on the brink of war, and that war being between the kingdom, who has a new young king, and lords that are in the north and south who want to unseat him. In this country, there's also a forest, and that is where Fire enters. Fire is our main character, and she is gorgeous, drop dead gorgeous, and she has hair like fire, hence her name. She is the last human monster in this world, and she has some pretty incredible abilities, including being able to not only hear the thoughts of the individuals around her, but be able to enter their minds and manipulate those things. She has created a moral compass for herself around it, in which she will not go into innocent people's minds and meddle around for her own self-preservation or self-benefit. Then enters Prince Briggan, who is on his way to collect Fire. She basically is expected to use her powers on people that the kingdom have caught in cohorts with the lords, and are trying to basically use her ability to uncover any sort of secret or any piece of information that could potentially help them in this war that they feel is coming. My favorite parts were when she was put in these really difficult situations, morally compromising. She had to really dive deep into herself and be like, what is the right thing to do here? This is obviously fantasy. There's a lot of magic. Also, a lot of the magic revolves around court politics and the influence that that magic has in the court. I gave this 4 stars when I originally read it, but now that I've had some distance from this book, I actually remember very little about the plot progression, so this is a 3 star. I did really like it though. The next book I read in November was The Heiress of Winterwood by Sarah E. Ladd, which is a historical fiction with romance that's set in 1814. And the book starts whenever our main character, Amelia Barrett, is next to her best friend, and she's just given birth and she's not doing well. And so she turns around to her friend and commits to taking care of the child after that friend is gone. She risks everything to keep her word, including proposing to the infant's father, whose name is Graham. Later in the book, the child is kidnapped and a ransom note is left, forcing Amelia and Graham to work together and do their best to get this child back. Overall, this book was heartwarming. Watching Amelia and Graham get to know each other under these crazy circumstances, with the proposal, which is obviously unconventional, and then their whole marriage being centered around that proposal and this kid. Their relationship was centered around so much grace and conviction, which is basically when both parties are like, I am flawed. I did something wrong. Let me explain to you why I did that. And then also recognize that, hey, that wasn't right. Let me do it differently next time. When you realize that you are wrong and you apologize, which we should all normalize, by the way, it's just such a cool thing to read about, because I don't feel that you really get that much, especially in historical fiction when you're talking about marriages that were in the 1800s. You don't really see that too much in literature. 4 stars. The next book I read in November was Incendiaries by R.O. Kwong, which is a contemporary fiction. And man, I had such high hopes for this one. The story follows two college kids, a girl named Phoebe Lynn and a guy named Will Kendall, who meet, start their relationship, and kind of start to date. The reason why I had such high hopes for this one is, and I will use a term coined by Kat from Paperback Dreams, cults, baby! That's right, folks. There is a cult featured in this book, and I was pumped for it. As Phoebe is grieving the passing of her mother and processing a lot of guilt surrounding that, she is sucked into a religious group started by a former student of the college, John Leal. All the while, Will is suffering from what I like to call paper towns by John Greenism, which is essentially when a person really likes a partner or a love interest and they think about them so often that their imagination just runs wild. Eventually, down the line, they're crushing on or are interested in a person who doesn't even exist. The plot is furthered when this religious group, this cult, bombs a few buildings and people are hurt, and then Phoebe disappears. Will then begins to search for her, and the plot continues from there. To talk about my feelings about this book was proving to be really difficult to articulate, and I was reading through some reviews on Goodreads, and I found this one, and I so wholeheartedly agree with it, I would like to read it to you. And it goes like this. Hip-hop pulsed, rolled, pale limbs shone, the room clattered into motion, inanimate objects verbed, so many inanimate objects did so much verbing, limbs throbbed, fingers flew over keyboards, eyes rolled, pages flipped. My brain wondered why everyone liked this book so much. Reviews bought it and slobbered. Prose purpled itself into oblivion. Plots did not happen. Sentences sparkled themselves to get death. Character motivations made no sense. Hemingway's grave was rolled over in. Thank you, Lauren Halster, for that beautifully written review. Now, that review, if you were kind of like finding that type of speaking and dictation sloppy or like hard to follow, that was the entire book. It was over 200 pages of verbs verbing. Like, it was so hard to follow. It made me feel really detached from the story. And so if that's something that you enjoy, that's great, good for you. It just really wasn't my thing. It was very frustrating because, again, like I've said so many times, I was very excited for this book. I thought that this was really, concept-wise, up my alley, and just the prose completely destroyed that for me. 2 out of 5. The next book that I read in November was Pumpkinheads, written by Rainbow Rowell and illustrated by Faith Erin Hicks. It was my first graphic novel. I had just such a fun time reading this book. Honestly, I picked it up because I saw Pumpkin and it was the month of November, and I was like, hey man, we're still in fall here in the Carolinas. This is applicable. This book follows the friendship of Deja and Josiah, who are around 18, but they're seniors, and this is their last time being employees for their local pumpkin patch, which they have done every season for years and years and years now, and they're always paired together, and they always work the same stand together. There is this girl that Josiah has been eyeing every season, every year, and has never talked to her. And Deja is getting sick of his pining, and they're good friends, and so she's like, all right, you and I are not working on the last night. We're just gonna ditch this job because, I mean, we're going to college next year. We don't need this job next year. We're gonna go find this girl and you're gonna go talk to her. They start running around this entire park. Honestly, I wish we had something like this. This park had hay rides, pumpkin patches, it had molasses, it had candy apple stands, it had popcorn, it had like animal petting stuff. I was like, all of this in one place? It'd be a dream to work out when I was 18, good lord. Yeah, this was just heartwarming and it was a good time. I really enjoyed reading it. It was, it's short, and then obviously it's a graphic novel, so that makes it even shorter. One of my favorite things about this book was like the color range. The colors in this book are so beautiful and really like aesthetically pleasing, as the kids are saying these days. I mean, did it like blow my mind? Do I think about it every day? No. But I thoroughly enjoyed this book, and I definitely think anybody who likes graphic novels should pick it up. 3 out of 5. The next book I'm going to talk about is Pride and Prejudice. It was my first time reading this. I never had to read it for school, never felt inclined to read it any other time in my life. But let me tell you, I get it. I get the hype. This book blew me away just in the sense that I don't go into reading classics with very high expectations ever. But this book had so much love and family dynamics, and it was really funny too. Mr. Bennet, come on. Mr. Bennet, Elizabeth's dad, is my favorite character. He was so funny, and his relationship with all of his daughters, especially Elizabeth, because that's when we saw the most, was just totally out of character for what I see in classics and literature written in this time frame. Normally the father-daughter relationships aren't there. And if they are there, they're not healthy. He genuinely cares about the well-being of all of his daughters. Also, not to just, this is just a whole hype up about how Mr. Bennet is hilarious. The way he talks to his wife is always fretting about her nerves. The mom is like, oh my goodness, like everything is so stressful for me, and like why won't you let her marry him, and why isn't he wanting to come over and talk to you about marrying my daughter? She is like off the rails crazy. And the way he talks to her, and just like the way that he is sarcastic with her, and he teaches that type of like comedy and encourages it with his daughters, this was a glorious time. 4 out of 5. The next book that I read is This Is What America Looks Like by Ilhan Omar, which follows her story and her journey as a refugee to a congresswoman. Her story is incredible, and it begins when she is 8 years old and war breaks out in Somalia where she lives. Her family is forced to flee and end up at a refugee camp in Kenya. There she says that she came to understand the true meaning of hunger and death. She spends 4 years there with her family, so 4 years and an intense vetting process later, her family and herself are admitted to come into the United States. Here she becomes a grassroots organizer. She graduates from college and is eventually elected Congresswoman of Minnesota. She faces and talks about in her book a lot of challenges and stereotypes from being a Muslim as well as a refugee. And she talks about how she is pushing the boundaries and continues to push the boundaries in Washington. This book was so good, a privilege to read. Definitely just hearing a story that feels so far away, because I don't have anybody close to me in my life who's gone through something like that, but just is a great realization that that's real, and that is the life and experience of a lot of people, and it was very sobering, came from a perspective of a lot of empathy. It was just a really, really cool read to learn more about her. The next book that I read was The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, which is a fantasy book about a middle-aged man who comes back to his hometown. He is walking down this lane and his house is no longer there, but he sits at a pond and he starts to remember specifically a young woman who used to live next to him. Her name is Letty Hempstock, and this pond she used to call an ocean. The ocean at the end of the lane. And as he's sitting there remembering, he starts to remember some frightening things. He also recalls not only Letty Hempstock, but her mother and grandmother, and he remembers through these frightening things that he would retreat to them and into their home for comfort as well as wisdom beyond the years of 8-year-old Letty Hempstock. When he's young, a man commits suicide in a stolen car at the end of this lane, and it essentially seems to set off a domino effect that sets darkness to come into the lives of his family, and that's where, like I was saying, he really begins to seek refuge in the Hempstock women's household. This was very creative and excitingly original. I really enjoyed the writing, and I liked the conflict a lot as well. It was a great read, but I will say what I'm learning about myself is that I don't enjoy stories told from the perspective of the character being older. To me, especially when there's malicious things afoot, it takes some of the grip out of the story, because I know that they're okay. Like, I know that they made it out of the situation alive and like everybody's fine. But if that's not something that you care about that much, or you don't mind that, I definitely recommend this book. It's original, it evokes a lot of feelings of adventure and of discovery and fantastical. Obviously, some fantastical things are going on, and some mystery as well. So I gave this a 3 out of 5. The next book that I read was The House on the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, which is an LGBT fantasy story about a caseworker named Linus Baker who works for the department in charge of magical youth. He is sent on a highly classified assignment to the Marseilles Island orphanage where 6 dangerous children reside with caretakers. He's basically sent to see whether this orphanage is fit for these children. The children that you and he perceive as dangerous at the beginning of the book start to develop character-wise and have personalities shine through. There's a strong theme of children are children, no matter who their parents say they are, no matter what their genes say that they are. It was a really, really heartwarming book. It literally just wrapped me up in a found family theme and dunked me in coffee. It was magical, it was fantastic, it had found family, it talked about connection, it talked about loneliness and connection through loneliness. Linus Baker, you see him go through such a transformation, and being around the right people. Who you surround yourself with reflects in yourself, and you see that for Linus Baker, and it is such an enchanting story. 5 out of 5. Would highly, highly recommend. The next book I read was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This is my first time reading this book as well. I'm not going to go too much into the plot on this just because it's a very well-known book, and if you don't know it or you haven't seen the movie, look it up somewhere else. Basically, Jay Gatsby is classy, he is wealthy, and he is pining over Daisy. He's a simp. I watched the movie, the old version, a long time ago. Then when the new version came out, it took me a couple of years, but I eventually got around to it and watched it. So, I mean, I knew the gist of what happens. But I will say in the movies, he is not portrayed nearly as heartsick puppy-like in those movies as he is in this book. I liked this more than I thought I was going to. It was definitely a really fun read. It was whimsical as well. Like, the scene when they start like throwing his shirts and stuff like that, ugh, beautiful. It was romantic. However, I definitely had very little patience for Daisy. Yeah, she was verging on annoying for me. This gets a 3 out of 5. The next book I have, I'm very excited to talk to you about, and that is City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty, which is an epic fantasy story set in the 1800s. It's Middle Eastern inspired, and it is the first in a trilogy that she has done called the Daevabad Trilogy. The trilogy follows our main character Nari, who is a swindler and a morally compromising character. Her career choice is a thief, and she is living in Napoleon-occupied Cairo. She also doesn't believe in magic, even though she can do some unusual things, which gets her in trouble when she accidentally summons a spirit who is a djinn, and his name is Dara. And Dara takes her across the land to the magical world of Daevabad. There she is thrust into some insane court politics and is forced to navigate her way into a role called Banu Nahida, which is a very rare type of healer, which she has the abilities to fill that role. Nari also is trying to learn about and understand a very long history of deep-seated prejudice between 2 groups of people, and that has a lot of influence on those political movements. So her navigating that is kind of funny. She's way behind. Scheming in this book is next level. Consequences in this book are next level, and I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. I was sucked in so quickly. I think about these characters every day. I genuinely care about them and their well-being. I want them to be okay. I want to know what their next move is. And I think that's a testament to S.H. Chakraborty's world building and her character development. I had an amazing time reading this book. I've already picked up and read the second one. And looking forward to reading the third. But I'm gonna be sad when it's over because I just really love it. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. If you like fantasy and are willing to dive into a multi-perspective book, this is it. The next book I read is Mr. Memory by Marcus Sedgwick, and this is a mystery historical fiction, and it is set in Paris in 1899. The opening scene is Marcel Dupré murdering his wife, and he is then carted off to an asylum where he is placed under the care of a doctor for evaluation. And shortly upon this evaluation, the doctor begins to understand that Marcel Dupré is not an ordinary man, hence our title, Mr. Memory. That's right, folks, this man has remembered every detail of his life. There is a policeman assigned to his case, and this policeman starts to suspect that there is something larger going on than just a simple lover's fight. He finds it strange that the criminal was carted off so quickly to the hospital, and that his superiors and supervisors are so keen to have this whole affair wrapped up. The summary finishes by saying, the policeman and the doctor between them must unravel the mystery, but the answers lie inside Marcel's head. And how can he tell what is significant when he remembers every detail of every moment of his entire life? This book was so good. It was also super original, and the concept is insane. I actually kind of, whenever I was thinking about it, I was like, this could turn really cheesy, and it didn't. It didn't. It took me on a wild ride. It talks about corruption, it talks about the sex industry, it talks about the porn industry, it talks about therapy and counseling methods of that time. Yeah, it was freaking brilliant. It addressed some tough topics, but not in the way where the author was trying to offer up solution to these topics. It was more of like a nod of, yes, you exist and you influence the story in this way. I thought it was really well done. I enjoyed the writing, 4 out of 5. And I'm definitely going to be reading more of Marcus Sedgwick in the future. The next book I read is It's Not Yet Dark by Simon Fitzgerald, which is another memoir. And this is about an Irishman who was diagnosed with a motor neuron disease in 2008, in which he is given 4 years to live. When he was told that, he really didn't feel that it was his time, to die, and he decided that he was going to use ventilation as a method of treatment, which is not typical in Ireland, so for MND patients. He has a passion for film and filmmaking and writing, which he talks about a lot in this book. The prose is short, it's very stark and it cuts off quick, but it is a beautiful story and it's very well written. The way he speaks about family and connection was really, really cool. He talks about connection in a way that it's like soul to soul. MND, you'll eventually lose your ability to speak and articulate, and so without the ability to speak, he'll communicate in other ways, obviously writing, and then when he loses his hands, he is in a wheelchair, which is like the smartest thing. I can't even describe what it does, but basically it does everything for him. But just that he still feels like heard and understood by his loved ones around him, and it's on a soul level. I thought that was really cool to read about. His relationship with his wife is beautiful. His relationship with his kids is beautiful. It was a privilege to read this book, so I recommend. The next book I read was A Court of Wings and Ruin by Sarah J. Maas, which is the third book in the series. I don't even know what the series is called, but it's a YA fantasy book. If you don't know about this series, I'm not going to talk to you about the plot. There are plenty of people on the internet who will tell you about the plot. You can go and look it up elsewhere because I don't want to talk about that. What I want to talk about is how surprised I was that this is the best book in the series. What? There are so many issues with this freaking book. And the whole series, it's really not my thing, so it's a 2 out of 5 for me. I don't really know what else to say about this book. And the last book that I read this month was Lord of the Flies by William Golding, which is a classic story. You might have read it in school. I didn't. This was my first time reading this. This story follows a group of schoolboys who are stranded on an island after a plane crash. No adults, no government, no rules, and they have to create their own version of leadership and of rules. One of the best things about this book for me was they had their town hall meetings. They get everybody together, all these kids, and they're like, okay, how are we gonna get anything done? Make shelter and find food and stuff like that, because nobody will shut up. And so they decide, is this conch that is found, is the speaking conch, you hand around a speaking stick in like a circle at preschool or whatever, This is the speaking conch, and I was just thinking about that scene in SpongeBob where they're like, the magic conch has spoken. Like that's the vibe that I got. So basically you watch their attempt at order completely be dismantled over time. And let me just say, I loved this book. I thought it was thought-provoking. I thought it was very well written. One of the things I really took away from it was the effects of personality clashing. So you see in school somebody who is shy or perceived as nerdy is bullied. But whenever you take away the constructs of what bullying is and you take away the school and you take away uniforms, that escalates, and it escalates so fast. This book was sad, it was unnerving, it was honestly disturbing at parts, and that was the reason why I liked it so much. It provoked all of the thoughts, and I thoroughly enjoy it and gave it a 4 out of 5. And that is it. That is it, my guys. I read 15 books in the month of November, which is a personal best for me. Have never read 15 books. Don't foresee myself reading 15 books again in a month. I was very happy to talk about these books with you guys. It was fun. It was a good time. Hope you had a fun time too. And I will see you in the next one.